remember a long time ago, a client said to me, when I asked her how she managed to stay so consistent, this particular client ran her own business, she traveled a lot with work, she had 2 children, and she always seemed to be able to do her sessions. Like, she wasn't a 4 or 5 times a week, but she was a 2 to 3 times per week, plus runs at the weekend. She just seemed to be very, very consistent. And she said to me, Andy, if motivation is the only thing that's stopping me from training, that I make sure I train, because I know there's so many things in my life that will physically stop me being able to exercise. And I thought it was a really great way to sort of frame it. Like, turning up and training when you really don't want to is the most important thing. Hello and welcome to the 5th episode of the Smart Strength Training Podcast. It's mid-January, the time this episode goes live, and that's about the time that people's motivation to train starts to dip. People start to get into a bit of a funk and they struggle to keep going with training. So I want to jump in now, because by the end of February, the statistics on the dropout rates of people that started training in the new year are pretty grim reading. I think it's worth talking about this word motivation. So what actually is motivation? So motivation refers to the process that initiates you towards a goal. We're all motivated to exercise and to eat a bit better. Certainly at first, generally we are. If you think of the context of anything that you are trying to do regularly or that you're already doing regularly, think about work, looking after a family member, or looking after your children. It's not motivation that gets you up every day and makes you go to work. It's not motivation that makes you look after your children. I appreciate they are extreme examples, but we've got to think that it needs something bigger than just motivation. Obviously, with work, there's a huge financial requirement to living life, so therefore we have to work. And with family and children, of course, there's a huge emotional connection. But with exercise, what is the driver? What is making you get up 3-4 times per week and to do some sort of physical activity? Because you can't look for motivation to be there all the time. You can look for it at the start of a journey, but it will start to drop off. So you need more than just motivation. I think a question I always ask people in this situation is, why do you exercise? What's your reason to train? Because when people orientate their entire focus on exercise around weight loss and body composition changes, then you're going to have major issues, because how are you going to stay focused on that? Because let's say you're using scale weight as your measure. Obviously, body weight is made up of lots of things. So a change in the scale could be changes in muscle, could be changes in stored sugar, glycogen in the muscle. It could be a loss of gain of water. There could be feces moving through the bowel, or it could be fat loss. So most people don't have access to accurate ways to determine whether or not what they're doing is actually affecting their body composition. Muscle mass just generally is very, very hard to measure accurately. There's nothing in the general population out there in the world currently that is affordable and accurate that people have access to outside of DEXA scanners. That's the same for body fat. Like, even if you've got a really fancy scale in your gym, body fat percentages are notoriously inaccurate, very, very hard to get accurate data on. And this is just to say that if you're going to put time into doing something, and we all know that time is a precious commodity, that if you're perceiving that to be a waste of time because you're not seeing the results that you're looking for, then of course you're going to get demotivated. But potentially, or certainly definitely in the context of body weight, you're looking in the wrong place to see some sort of change. So let's talk about what could be some really smart tips to think about. So first up, start small. I appreciate the new year's already been and gone, but most people come out the traps thinking they've got to change loads. So they've got to train 3 to 4 times per week. They're going to try and get some runs in, hit 10,000 steps per day, and of course, nutritional changes as well. Every single element of that requires layers of complexity to try and get it in place and keep it in place. Even something as simple as training 2 or 3 times per week. It might seem simple on the outset, but what time of day are you going to train? How is that going to impact your sleep or the time spent with loved ones in the evening? Or how is it going to affect your work? How are you going to get to the gym? How are you going to eat before the gym? How is it going to affect your lunch or your breakfast or your dinner? There's so many layers to it that I just don't think people realize how much change trying to maneuver into this sort of like healthier version of yourself becomes. So therefore, I know it's human nature to want to do things and do it really well and feel like you're really pushing forward and everything's pulling in the same direction. But the reality is starting small, starting with just one basic thing and trying to lock that in, create momentum with that. And I much prefer the word momentum than motivation, certainly when it comes to becoming a long-term exerciser. Because if you can just maintain some momentum, and even for someone that is like quote unquote consistent with training, they'll have periods where they're struggling to hit their 3 sessions and they're just like able to do 1 session, but that 1 session becomes really powerful because it maintains the momentum. And we've got to think of, there are so many things that are going to affect your ability to turn up week on week and train. Sickness, holidays, working late, injuries, and loads of other things are going to disrupt momentum. So it's not about motivation. It's about learning how to pivot and how to maneuver around the chaos that is life. If you're an adult with a job or family, you are not going to have a clear how many months to nail all your sessions, get all your sleep that you want, hit your step count. So it's not about this sort of like perfect week. And I think people, they desire these weeks to be like absolutely spectacular, like all their sessions locked in, hit the step count every single day, smash their protein targets, stay hydrated. Like, just good luck doing that. It's just never going to happen. So maybe just thinking about what consistency with training actually is, because consistency with training really is just keeping on going. Some weeks it might be 3 times per week. Some weeks it might be once per week. That is still consistency. And even if you do miss a week, just continue on your training. And even if you do miss a week, just continue with your training. One of the things I often say to my clients, if they've got a 3-part workout, let's say 3 gym sessions, and they miss day 3 1 week, we just start day 3 the next week. Human body's got no idea what a 7-day week is. So if you're starting day 3 on a Tuesday, doesn't matter. And you just stay in that momentum. Then you never missed day 3. You just moved it along a little bit. And that can be quite liberating because it takes a bit of the pressure off feeling like you have to get all those sessions in, because it is very, very hard to stay consistent, especially in a world where people are under so much pressure from all fronts with their time. I remember a long time ago, a client said to me, when I asked her how she managed to stay so consistent, this particular client ran her own business, she traveled a lot with work, she had 2 children, and she always seemed to be able to do her sessions. Like, she wasn't a 4 or 5 times a week, but she was a 2 to 3 times per week, plus runs at weekend. She just seemed to be very, very consistent. And she said to me, Andy, if motivation is the only thing that's stopping me from training, that I make sure I train, because I know there's so many things in my life that will physically stop me being able to exercise. And I thought it was a really great way to sort of frame it. Like, turning up and training when you really don't want to is the most important thing. And that's what I think, if you change the mindset away from fat loss and weight loss and body composition, and you start to become more performance minded, I think it starts to become a much, much stronger driver to get you out of bed and do that run, to go and do a walk in the morning, to get into the gym and lift some weights. Because if you're slowly chipping away at your 5K run time, or you've got a PB to try and achieve on a walking lunge or a deadlift, it's much more motivating to get up and go and do that. And you can feel really proud of your achievements when you do those sessions and you achieve that work. And the gym is a very honest place. If you turn up and apply effort and you're consistent, doesn't mean 3 times per week, as I've already said, it can be 3 1 week and 1 the week after, you will see your strength, your fitness, or anything you're looking at that's performance-based, you will see the needle move in the right direction. Whereas when you're only ever looking at body fat or body weight, those numbers are going to move all over the place. Because the human body isn't this like machine that just loses weight on a linear trajectory, but also because we don't have the accuracy in measuring a lot of the things that people would like to have the accuracy on, certainly when it comes to body fat percentage, certainly when it comes to lean muscle mass. And a lot of the way that I talk to certainly my clients is to orientate a lot of this around the habits that you're putting in place. So I mentioned start small. That one is key. So you start small. You get into the process of just like, hey, I'm going to start training on a Monday and a Saturday, or Tuesday and a Saturday, whatever works. It hasn't got to be two, whatever you think is the most realistic amount of times that you can definitely train. If you definitely can't do 4, but you think you can do 3, but you know 100% you can do 2, start with 2. Anything over 2 is wonderful. Build that habit in. Depending on where you read, it takes somewhere up from 4 weeks up to 66 days, supposedly, to lock in a habit. So I would spend a good month just trying to kind of lock that in. So when you've locked that in and it feels like it's got a bit repetitive, and now you're like, right, no, Tuesdays are just sorted, Saturdays are just sorted. Now I want to try and get a Wednesday, a morning walk in, or I want to start building up and do couch to 5K and build up my 5K run. Layer in one thing at a time. And the wonderful thing about doing that and creating habits is that by itself creates the momentum and the sort of almost a positive snowball of when you start exercising and you're consistent for 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 weeks, you start to want to make other changes elsewhere. You start to want to go to bed a little bit earlier. You start to not want to use your phone so late at night because you might have noticed it impacts your sleep. You've read a little bit about protein and maybe you want to start to increase protein intake in your meals, rather than coming in trying to do that all at once. And it's the same, even if you have been successful with training in the past and you've had a break in training, or you're trying to get back into training and you know all these things that you want to be doing, even then I'd suggest to hold back on trying to do it all and just to try and do it in small steps. The next thing is, and this doesn't always sit so well with people, but you've got to be organized. Like, if exercise is going to stay in your life forever, and I would strongly advise that you don't want to be the sort of person that embarks on a 12 to 16 week body transformation. You want to be the sort of person that just exercises 2 to 4 times per week pretty consistently, year on year. That's really what we want. Like, you've got to be organized to do that. You've got to be looking at your calendar and maybe spotting where you might have a challenge the up and coming week. One of the things that I do in my calendar, which I often tell my clients about, is my workouts go into my Google calendar as a recurring event. They're a different color to everything else in my calendar, and they're moved to 5:30 in the morning. Not because I always train at 5:30, but they're not in the way of my work day, so it won't impact where people are booking things into my calendar. And then what I do on a Friday as part of my sort of down tools for the week is I shuffle those workouts around, and I have a little think about, like, where my calls getting booked in, what am I doing this week, and I'll rejig them so it works for me. So my weeks are always completely different because of the nature of my business, and that works for me. I'm not saying you have to do that, but you've got to have a way of being organized, just trying to fit exercise in as slots come up. If it works for you, great, but more often than not, that's not going to work. And having a little bit more of a plan around it can be good. Some people get really frustrated, like, oh, I plan so much of my life, I don't want to plan exercise as well. That's okay if that works for you. But if you're struggling to exercise and you're struggling to stay consistent, elevate exercise up in your mind in the hierarchy of things that are important to you. And in that situation, I think organizing your training is a really smart thing to do. One thing that my business coach actually was a bit of a game changer for me. I never really used to like looking at my work diary on a Sunday, but I do now, because I'll organize my week on the Friday and then I'll go back in on the Sunday and have a quick look and just make sure that I've not missed anything. Because that Sunday, just quick 2-minute check, often I can realize, oh, actually, I need to train half hour earlier tomorrow because I've seen a call get booked in, or I've just noticed something. And then I'm not coming into the week having noticed it first thing in the morning, missed the session, and started the week with a negative around exercise. If you can start the week with a positive, that doesn't always mean training Monday morning, That just means like setting your intention for the week around exercise. For me and for a lot of my clients, that's become really, really important. But you've got to be flexible. It's okay having a plan, but you can't be so rigid in your plan. Like you want to train Monday, Wednesday, Fridays. That's great, but that's probably not always going to be possible. And it's really important that you allow yourself to move things around. And if you do miss a session, cut yourself some slack. Like I said, it's not missing a session if you just move it along and you capture it the following week. But also, don't cut yourself too much slack. I think it's very, very clear. Sometimes people are making too many excuses for why they're pushing exercise down the line. And to be like brutally honest, people do waste a lot of time scrolling for 10, 15 minutes in the morning, and then all of a sudden you realize you can't go and train. Those sorts of habits, we have to make sure we're not being too soft on ourselves and we are stricter with our time. But it's important to realize that the same person in the same week might need to cut themselves some slack at some points, but there'd be a little bit more of a sort of rocket fired up their arse later in the week. But I think it's really important just to make sure that you appreciate that it has to be fluid, it has to be flexible. And that way you can start to create that momentum and build on it from there. So like I said, I was motivated myself to do this podcast episode because of the time of the year that it is. We really appreciate that January is a tough time. It's cold, it's dark in the UK. It's not the easiest time to be exercising. Gyms are really, really busy. Many people are much more likely to be getting ill this time of the year. So we recognize that it's probably actually the worst time of the year to embark on a fitness journey. It just happens to align to the start of the year that a lot of people, millions of people do so. So know that you are starting or you have started at a challenging time of the year just because of the seasonality of January in United Kingdom. But if you do come at this with some of the pointers I've laid out to you, I hope and I think you will be successful at keeping on going and maintaining some momentum. So I'm hoping that was useful and there were some good bits in there that you can instantly start to implement in your life to keep you on track with your training. And if you want help putting some of these tips mentioned in today's episode in place in your own life, then you can work with me doing one-on-one bespoke online training. You can check out my website, andyvincentpt.com, for more information.